Those of you who have been here before, I do recognize a lot of names here, so welcome back. For those of you who have not been here before, we are the Marine Environmental Education Center located out on Hollywood Beach, Florida. We are trying to do a lot of really cool virtual programming because we are still closed to the public, and we are lucky enough to have some really awesome friends in the marine science field willing to donate their time and teach us about a bunch of really cool things. Oh, wait one second. So today we're actually talking to Jessica Powell. She is a biologist with NOAA Fisheries with an expertise in human impacts on marine mammals. She actually got her master's in marine science from USF, and she started her career, if any of you guys have been to Mote Marine Lab over in Sarasota, really cool place. She started out there doing dolphin training and learning a lot about their behavior. So we are very turtle focused here a lot of the time, but we're really excited today to be working with marine mammals. They are close to my heart, and we are about to learn from an expert. So if you give me 1 second, I'm going to bring up the slides. Oops. Let's see, screen share. Beautiful. Okay, everyone can see that?
Perfect.
Perfect. So I'm going to mute myself. Just tell me when you need to go to the next slide.
Sure. And Taylor, if you don't mind, the first couple slides I require a little bit of audience participation. So if we can unmute for the first couple, if that's okay, or maybe once I ask the questions, you can unmute. And then,
absolutely. Yeah, so everyone, feel free to unmute yourself to answer questions, but remember to mute yourself afterwards so she could hear you more clearly. Also, if you have any questions, we can throw those in the chat, and if she doesn't see them immediately, we'll make sure to answer all of them at the end.
Great, thank you, Taylor. And Taylor, thank you for that great introduction, and thank you to the Education Center for having me here today. I'm really excited to share with you all what I know about bottlenose dolphin biology, behavior, and conservation. As Taylor said, my expertise is studying how dolphins interact with fisheries and tourism activities. And so I'm going to share a little bit with you guys today, a little bit about dolphins, and then hopefully we can talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to conserve dolphins here in Florida. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, and if so, please save those for the end. But I would love to chat more about them. So next slide, please. All right. So first question. I see a lot of out there. Can we have any guesses for how many species of dolphins we have in the world? Do I have any guesses? Let's see, we'll give it a second.
6.
How many species of dolphins do you think there are? What do you guys think?
6.
Did you say 6?
Hmm?
That's a good guess. What else? It's higher.
14.
14, still higher. Anyone else? 500, I see.
500.
So, oh, who said 30?
33.
33.
Woo!
That's really close. So there's actually there's about 32 species of dolphins in the world, and there's five species of river dolphins. So all in all, we have about 37 species of dolphins throughout the world. Next slide, please. So I bet some of you guys might recognize this animal. This is a bottlenose dolphin. These are common to waters here around Florida. So if you're ever out on the boat or at the beach, these are the dolphins that you're probably seeing. This is the species, and you know, I'll be honest, us scientists, we're not very creative with the name. So the reason that these guys are called bottlenose is because it looks like they have a bottle for a nose, and that's really their mouth. But that's how they got their name, bottlenose. But these guys are all around in our bays and estuaries and around the beaches around Florida. So these are the animals that if you're ever out and about, you're probably seeing. Next slide, please. And so this animal, again, we're not super creative with our names. This is a spotted dolphin, And these animals also live in the coastal waters around the state of Florida. So you have to go a little bit farther out on a boat typically to see these guys, but they are around. What's cool about these animals is spotted dolphins actually are born with nearly no spots at all. And they gain spots as they get older in age. And as they get older, they get what you call a modeling pattern, which you're starting to see a little bit here, is where the spots all run together. So these guys actually change, their skin patterns actually change as they age. So pretty cool animals there. Next slide, please. Anybody know what this guy is? Any guesses out there? I see, I think Marlon, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. I think he has a guess for us. Can we unmute him? Or is that challenging? Might be. Well, so for those of you who guessed, this is a river dolphin. This is an Amazon river dolphin, also commonly called the boto. These guys are really cool. I love talking about these animals because they're so,
Next one.
they're so highly evolved for where they live. So if you guys can kind of see where their little eyes are, they're really tiny. Essentially, those are just what we call vestigial. That means those eyes don't even work anymore. They just essentially can sense light and dark. And that makes a lot of sense because if you look in the water, look around this animal, look where it's swimming in some pretty muddy water. So that animal doesn't even need eyes anymore. It can't, there's no use for them. It can't see anything anyway. So this animal has basically lost its eyesight and now it can just sense light and dark. The other cool thing about this animal is that really long beak, or what we call a rostrum. And you can see how long it is. And there's a reason the animal has evolved to have such a long beak. And I'm going to show you with our next slide here. You guys might recognize these. These are called mangroves. And along the Amazon River, there's a lot of mangroves, or there's a lot of trees with roots, a root system under the water. And that's where fish like to hide. So it's really helpful if you're a dolphin with a really long beak to be able to use that to stick that in through the roots and pick out those fish. So those river dolphins, they are perfectly adapted for their environment. They don't have their eyes anymore, but they don't need them, but they do have their long beaks to help them fish inside the root systems of the trees along the rivers. Let's see, next slide, please. All right, show of hands here. How many people think these animals are whales? Raise your hand. How many people think these are dolphins? Raise your hand. All right, so the folks who raised their hands for dolphins, you are correct. These are killer whales, but they're not very accurately named. These are actually the largest member of the dolphin family. So killer whales are actually dolphins. And you know, these are very cool animals. Believe it or not, this picture here was taken by a friend of mine in the Caribbean. So killer whales do live near Florida. They live in the Gulf of Mexico, here on my coast on the other side. And they also live in the Caribbean, and they live probably farther offshore of the Atlantic coast of Florida. The type of killer whales that live around here are called transient killer whales. That means that they eat other mammals. So they eat smaller dolphins, they eat smaller whales. They don't really eat fish. They're more into eating mammals. All right, so next slide here. All right, so just some fun facts about dolphins. I have a little map up here so you can see where bottlenose dolphins live. We're going to transition back to bottlenose since that's what's most common here in Florida. So bottlenose dolphins live pretty much around the world, and they live basically in all waters except for our poles. So the really cold water, that's not for them, but they do live in most other parts of the world and in our oceans. These guys aren't super fast, but they can get up to 20 miles per hour in brief sprints. Males and females are very difficult to tell apart. I know there's some myths out there that sometimes that the females have pinker bellies, but that's not true. Males and females essentially look the same to anyone out there seeing dolphins on the water. Really, as researchers, the only way we're able to really tell them apart, besides doing a temporary live capture of them, is by behavior. So females tend to have a calf, and so then we can figure out that she's a mom, so she's a female. And sometimes we're able to figure out males because they will follow some females and calves in pairs. So sometimes that's how we can figure that out. But it's all based on behavior. You can't tell them apart just by looking at them. And so bottlenose dolphins here around Florida, they can't really hold their breath as long as you think they would, only about 5 minutes. But they don't really need to, because the waters around Florida are pretty shallow. And when they're in our bays and estuaries, they don't need to make those deep dives and with those deep breath holds like some of their oceanic cousins. So one of the really cool things about dolphins that I like to share with people is they all have their own unique name that they give themselves. So, and the way they use those names is to help communicate with other dolphins that may live in the same area as them. So for example, if I wanted to, and I start swimming around in Dolphin 2, and if I was coming near her, I might start whistling my whistle, and I'd say something like, I would see Taylor, and I would say her name, and I would say Taylor, Taylor, Taylor. And that's how we would communicate. And then she might repeat my name, and she would repeat her name. So here I have 2 signature whistles that I wanted you guys to listen to. The first one is from an adult male in Sarasota, Florida. So I'll let Taylor play that for me, or Christina. Uh-oh, we couldn't hear it. Not sure if we can.
Here, let me try one more time.
Okay, let's see. Muted. Oh, I think we heard it that time. If we could turn the volume up, we almost had it.
Yep. Let's see. There.
So that is the adult male, and now maybe we can play the female. So you guys can see how different their whistles are. So each dolphin has a different whistle, and that is essentially their name, so they can tell each other apart. Pretty cool stuff. So we'll keep going if you guys don't mind. Okay. So I know sometimes it gets a little confusing because I hear a lot of folks sometimes confuse the words porpoise and dolphin. But they're very different animals, and so that's just important to know. So as you can see from the 2 pictures here, I always like porpoises to me kind of look like big swimming beach balls. They're very round, they're very robust, and whereas a dolphin looks more like a torpedo. As you can see in the picture, it's very streamlined. They're much faster animals. And that makes a lot of sense because porpoises like to live in cold water, so they need a lot of blubber to keep them warm. You won't really find porpoises anywhere around Florida. The farthest south they live is North Carolina. So they like that cold northeast water, whereas we have our dolphins tend to not go any farther north than like the New York, New Jersey area. So they overlap a little bit, but not a lot. And you can see their dorsal fins are different. The fin on their back are different shapes. And also kind of a cool little fact here is their teeth are different. So we'll go to the next slide. So you can see this is a porpoise's teeth. You can see they look pretty rounded. They're pretty small. And then if you want to look at dolphins' teeth, they're pretty sharp. They're like upside down ice cream cones. And so these guys have they're very different, and not only in behavior, but in anatomy, as you can see too. All right, let's see. We'll head to the next slide. All right, so everybody likes to talk about baby dolphins usually. So some fun trivia here for you. I think most of you probably know that dolphins are mammals, right? And mammals breathe air and they're warm-blooded, and mammals also have hair, right? So who thinks that dolphins have hair? Raise your hand. So believe it or not, dolphins are born with hair because they are mammals. So here in that picture where the big yellow arrow is pointing to, you can see 5 little hairs on the dolphin's rostrum, their little beak there. And dolphins, newborn dolphins, are born with about 5 or 6 follicles of hair, but they fall out after about a week, or between a week and 3 weeks. But they are mammals, so they do have hair. So believe it or not, dolphins have hair. Dolphins stay with their moms for about typically 3 to 4 years. They're pretty good moms, and they nurse from their moms because, again, they're mammals. They drink milk, and as you can imagine, it'd be kind of hard to drink out of a bottle or nurse from your mom while you're swimming and moving in the ocean. So what mom does is she actually squirts the milk into the calf's mouth, and that's how they get their food. Calves also aren't very good swimmers when they're first born, so they swim in the slipstream of mom. It's something we call the echelon position, but you can kind of see it in the lower picture. The calf will swim kind of right next to mom, and because she's in the slipstream of mom, mom kind of pulls her along as they're moving throughout the area. All right, so we'll keep going. Let's see. So this is why I fell in love with dolphins and why I wanted to study dolphins so much when I was little. Dolphins are some of the best hunters, and they have really plastic behavior in that they can learn new behaviors very quickly, and they can adapt their environment to hunt in the most efficient way possible. So they are just awesome hunters. And for those of you folks that live in Florida, you probably have seen them out there hunting. Sometimes some of the behaviors we see commonly here in Florida is they chase fish against a seawall. They'll toss fish up in the air. They'll fluke fish they'll hit fish with their tail and kick it up in in the air. But also some of the really cool behaviors they do also here in the United States, and in North Georgia and South Carolina, if you can see in that lower left-hand frame with the mud bank exposed, is dolphins actually wait for low tide, and when the water goes out, they chase fish up onto the banks and temporarily strand themselves. So they come out of the water and pick the fish off the banks. Let me tell you, it is absolutely a spectacular behavior to see in person, and it happens very quickly, but it is very cool to see. One of the other behaviors that my colleague and I are fortunate enough to continue study till today is mud ring feeding behavior, and that is unique to Florida Bay. So that's pretty close to you guys. That's just on the other side of Key Largo near Miami. And this is a very unique behavior. As far as we know, this is unique to Florida Bay, and it's not seen anywhere else in the world. And if you guys don't mind clicking that little link down there, it's going to take us to the BBC video, which my colleague and I helped film. And let's see. And we can keep it on mute, but I'm just going to kind of walk you guys through what you're seeing here because it's a really cool behavior. And I wanted to share it with you guys today. Let's see if you can, perfect. And we'll just play this. So lots of people like to film mud ring feeding behavior because it is pretty spectacular. So we're down there at least once a year doing some filming with a film crew. But this, I think that these guys got some of the best footage. Let's see, I think it's buffering. But what you're gonna see here, one of my favorite behaviors. So one of the cool things about dolphins is how they rest. It's very hard to tell when a dolphin is resting. It actually looks a lot like when they're traveling. And that's something to keep in mind when you're out watching dolphins on the boat is you never know when they might be essentially resting or sleeping. So when dolphins rest, they don't necessarily change their behavior. They still kind of are moving. It's almost, they're still swimming, they're still moving. It's almost like someone hit a slow motion button. They're just moving a little bit slower, and they tend to get a lot closer together. So you'll see in this lower picture here that those animals are resting. So the group gets a little bit tighter, and they're moving a little bit slower than the animals in the top picture that are traveling. So the other cool thing about how dolphins rest is they actually, I'm sure many of you heard this because it's kind of a fun fact, but they do turn off only one half of their brain at a time. And the reason that they have to do that is because dolphins have to be awake to breathe. So unlike you and I, when we go to bed at night, we still breathe and we don't worry about it. But if a dolphin were to completely go asleep, that animal would stop breathing. And so it keeps part of its brain engaged to help the animal continue to breathe, and also to keep an eye out for predators, because the ocean can be a pretty tricky place. All right, next slide. So one of the fun things to see when you're out viewing dolphins is all the social behavior. And dolphins are very social animals. They like to interact with one another. They like to play with each other. They can be pretty aggressive. These are big animals, as we talked about. They're about 500 pounds each, and I think people forget that. So they can be very aggressive with one another. They do often do what we call as raking, which is where they open their mouth and run their teeth along the body of another dolphin. So they can be pretty aggressive there. And I think that a lot of people think that dolphins pods groups. There's a big difference between those terminologies. So killer whales live. The reason that we say that killer whales live in pods is because they are always with the same animals all the time. So if you were to see killer whale A, you would always see killer whale B. They are always together. Those animals are never separated. But dolphins are different. Dolphins are more like a human society. They're more like people. And they live in something called a fission-fusion society, where they're constantly changing what other animals they're associating with. So to give you an example, like I said, dolphins are just like people, right? So for me, I live in a fusion-fission society as well. So before the pandemic, when I would leave my house, I would go to work, and I was with my work associates. And then maybe I would go out to lunch, and then I was with people in the restaurant, and those were my lunch associates. And then maybe I would come home to my family, and those were my family associates. And then maybe I would go for a walk with some friends in the evening, and that I was with different associates. So as you can see, I'm just like a dolphin. I'm constantly changing who I'm associating with, and dolphins do the same thing. Although they might have some best friends that you might often see them with, there's no guarantee when you see one dolphin, you're going to see another dolphin. So they're constantly changing. So that's why we say that they live in groups and not pods. All right, next slide, please. So another important thing to kind of keep in mind if you're ever out on the water, if you ever see dolphins, is that dolphins can be easily disturbed. And so some of the ways you can look out for that is some of the behavior shown here. So if you're ever out on a boat or out kayaking and you see dolphins and they start moving quickly away from you in a very not predictable direction, those animals are probably trying to avoid you, and it's probably best to move on and leave them alone. Also, sometimes people think it's fantastic when dolphins are jumping up and falling on their side. That is typically a disturbance behavior, believe it or not. That is the animal trying to communicate and make a very loud sound that it's not happy. And so if you see that behavior, it's best to back off. The same thing if the dolphin takes its fluke out of the water and slams it on the top of the surface of the water. It's called a tail slap because it sounds like the animal is slapping the water. That's another big sign of disturbance. Also, if you ever see a mom and calf and the mom is putting her body between you and her calf, that usually means that she's perceiving you as dangerous. And she is protecting her calf by using her body as a shield. So again, Something to remember if you're out there and you're seeing those different behaviors is to give those animals their space. So now I'm gonna jump a little bit more into how we study dolphins and some of the things that that I work on. So the basis for a lot of bottlenose dolphin science is essentially just taking attendance, just like when you go to school. And how we do that, next slide please, is we get different pictures of their dorsal fins. So these are some dolphins that I study in Key West, Florida. They live around there year round. These are resident animals. And these are all some of the different, I picked out some of the best fins from our catalog here to show you how different the fins look. And this is how I tell them apart when I'm in the field. Over time, we learn by sight their dorsal fins, and we can identify individuals, you know, once we get their photos, and also when we're in the field actively doing research. And that's how we tell them apart. So essentially, a dolphin's dorsal fin is like their fingerprint. They're all pretty unique and they're all different. And the way they get all those nicks and notches that you see on those dorsal fins is through a number of different things. But the major way is from socializing with each other. As I said, they're pretty rough, they're pretty aggressive, and they cause a lot of nicks and notches on each other. You know, it's also from the environment, rubbing on probably different things on the bottom or in the water column. In some cases, it's pretty sad. Sometimes dorsal fins are recognizable because the animal's been hit by a boat or because it's been entangled in fishing line and it leaves a big scar. That's another way we can tell those animals apart. And genetics also has a lot to do with it. Sometimes the shape of the dorsal is really distinctive. As you can see here, Lancelot has a very triangular shaped fin, whereas Buddy has a very long kind of sickle shaped fin. And so those are some of the differences that we see. All right, we're going to go to the next slide here. So by being able to tell individual dolphins apart, by being able to recognize individuals, we can do lots of things. And one of those things is we can figure out what dolphins do during their day. So here is an activity budget. This was from some work I did in Sarasota Bay, but we were essentially looking at how animals that interact with fishermen and animals that don't interact with fishermen, how those dolphins spend time during the day and how it was different. And because we were able to figure out who's who, we can track those animals over time and see what they do throughout the day. Next slide, please. We can also do really cool social analysis. This was done by a friend of mine who studies dolphins here in Tampa Bay. And because she knows all the different dolphins, she can recognize them by their dorsal fins. She's able to tell who hangs out with who, and she's able to create these really cool analyses where she can figure out who's friends and who's not, essentially. Next slide, please. And by being able to do that, she was able to figure out what the neighborhoods in Tampa Bay look like. So this is where I live over here on that little peninsula right there in St. Pete, Florida. And you can see the dolphins in my area have neighborhoods. So even though they all are part of one population that lives in Tampa Bay, there are very distinct neighborhoods, and they tend to have a very distinct group of animals that they hang out with on a daily basis. And this is all because we're able to do photo ID. Next slide, please. And so some of the other cool things that photo ID makes possible, or being able to see those individual dolphins, is we're able to figure out how many dolphins are in an area and when they come into an area. So that process is called, a statistical analysis is called mark recapture. And so that is really neat because you can essentially count the number of times you see the same individual each time. And then you also count all the new fins you're seeing each time you go out. And by doing some fancy statistics and modeling, you're able to figure out how many dolphins live in that area approximately, and how many come in seasonally and are only migratory. So some cool analysis that can be done there. See next slide. So one of the ways I also use photo ID, especially here in my job at NOAA, where our job is to help protect marine mammals and make sure they're in our oceans for years to come, is is to help understand how they use their environment and how that overlaps with how humans use their environment. So this was a study that we did in Key West, Florida, where there's a lot of tourism. A lot of people like to go to Key West and they like to go dolphin watching. And the area where they like to go dolphin watching is the area called the Dolphin Triangle. So you'll see the Dolphin Triangle on your screen, the little highlighted triangle area, kind of in the middle of the map. And so we were trying to understand how the dolphins use that habitat where the tour boats like to go all the time. And as you can see here, this is one of our resident animals. Her name was Long Tall. And she, essentially, we only see her in the Dolphin Triangle. That is a really important habitat to her. She only uses that area, essentially, even though, you know, we were looking essentially everywhere in the red box, but that was the only place she liked to be. Next slide, please. And then here we have another mom. This is Grandy. And you could see by the green dots where she liked to be. So she was kind of all over the area, all over the place. She liked to be sometimes in the Dolphin Triangle. Other times she was closer to Key West Harbor, as you can see. And then other times she was all the way pretty far out to Boca Grande Key. So she utilized kind of the whole habitat. So as a conservation scientist, as a manager, this helps me figure out where are the best places to protect and where can we protect the most dolphins and the most sensitive dolphins when we're trying to come up with ways to help these animals. So next slide, please. So this is a really complicated slide, and I'm not going to get into all the fancy statistics, but basically what I want to show you guys is that, again, this all comes back to photo ID. And because this is some work I did in Panama City, Florida, and because I was able to identify the different dolphins, I was able to figure out how much, what the impacts of boats and people getting close to dolphins were. And as you can kind of see in that big blue arrow, you can see that when a person or a boat got closer than about 10 meters to a dolphin, that animal was 32 times more likely to abandon what it was doing and to go check out the boat. So it was essentially stopping all those really important behaviors like resting and feeding. And so that's important for us to understand. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So speaking of Panama City, this is a little video here. Hopefully it'll play if you click on it. This is what Panama City looks like. And this is where we were studying those tourism interactions. And I just wanted to give you guys a taste of why we were studying it. So believe it or not, there is one dolphin in between all these different boats. You can kind of see him here in the middle of your screen. So this is also a hot spot where people like to try to swim with wild dolphins, which is technically not legal under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They also illegally feed dolphins. And it's pretty dangerous. The dolphin that you're seeing here is displaying a lot of aggressive behaviors. And in fact, what happened was somebody actually was seriously injured in Panama City, and probably could have been, it could have been a lot worse. So they were lucky because one of the dolphins was very aggressive looking for food. So it's really important for us to study these areas and understand the human behavior just as much as the dolphin behavior, because they can have huge impacts on the animals and then also can affect people. So let's see, we're gonna move to the next slide here. So just to give you guys an effect, if what seems really innocent of getting close to a dolphin on your boat can really have a really big domino effect. And these are some of the things that all the different research studies have found. And so I'm just gonna kind of walk you through this quickly, but essentially when a dolphin is disturbed by people, it causes a lot of changes to how they interact with other dolphins. It causes changes in where they like to be, and it causes changes in their behavior. And so what you see is that animals will start to approach boats with less caution because they're used to it. So if you think about it, if you lived really close to a highway, at first you might be really cautious about not getting hit with a car, but over time you let down your guard and you probably take more risks than the average person would. And that's what happens with dolphins. And so we see in areas with lots of boats, you see a lot more dolphins with boat strikes, as you can see in the far right picture. That animal was hit on the head, and believe it or not, that animal survived. I don't know how, but that animal is still swimming around in Southwest Florida. It's pretty phenomenal. It has a huge scar, but he's still kicking, so that's pretty cool. But not every animal is that lucky. You know, it causes other issues. Moms and calves can be easily separated in the confusion of lots of boats around. Mom can get spooked, the calf gets spooked, and then, as you can imagine, that causes a lot of problems, especially if those animals don't reunite or if that calf starts missing lots of feedings. It causes a lot of health problems. And also, if animals aren't getting the time they need to feed because they're constantly being chased by boats, that again also causes huge problems, which, as you can imagine, less dolphins survive and reproduction goes down. And that all leads to population decline. And so part of my job is to make sure that we don't get there. And if we are there, how do we reverse those trends? So next slide, please. So this is a similar slide here of feeding dolphins. So if you weren't aware, feeding wild dolphins is illegal. It's highly illegal, and it's dangerous not only for you, but it's dangerous for the dolphin too. What happens when a dolphin is fed is that animal, same thing as if it's constantly being surrounded by boats, is it starts to lose its wariness of boats and people, and it will start to approach boats. And so we'll see changes in behavior. So if you could see in that upper right-hand picture of the dolphin with its mouth open, that's a begging behavior. If you ever see that in the wild, that animal has been conditioned and fed by people. It's been trained by people. That is not a normal dolphin behavior. Dolphins do not come out of the water and open their mouths. That's not normal. And so what happens is when dolphins start begging from boats, dolphins are really social animals, so they spread that behavior to other dolphins. As you can see here, this is on the right side of the screen, you'll see that there's a picture of a dolphin. It's kind of her family tree here, and all the dolphins circled in red are dolphins that started interacting with fishing gear. So she passed that behavior on to all of her calves, who then passed on to their calves, and they probably passed it on to their friends as well. So because dolphins have such huge social networks, behaviors, once one animal learns something because maybe a person made a bad choice and fed that dolphin, it spreads like wildfire through the community. And lots of dolphins then learn that behavior. And what happens is not everybody likes to see dolphins by their boat. And so unfortunately, some people can retaliate against those animals or do some pretty horrendous things. Also, if dolphins are getting closer to boats, they're more likely to get hit by boats. They're more likely to get entangled in fishing gear. And those are all big issues here in Florida. And also feeding dolphins, we can't replicate what they should be getting in the ocean. Frozen fish causes a lot of dehydration. It carries a lot of bacteria. And those animals can get very sick from those fish. And overall, again, that all leads again to population decline, which is where myself and the folks I work with, where we try to prevent those types of decline and stop these behaviors before we get to that point. So next slide, please. So what are we doing as an agency? So again, as I think Taylor introduced me at the beginning, I work for NOAA Fisheries, and our job is to implement the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which is the federal law to protect all marine mammals, including bottlenose dolphins. So what are we doing? Let's see, next slide, please. So we do a variety of things, but basically when we're dealing with harassment or we're dealing with illegal feeding of wild dolphins, we mostly engage in education and outreach. There is enforcement, but when we're trying to educate the public, we use a variety of different things. You can check out some of our apps, which describe responsible ways to view dolphins. We have lots of brochures. We have a PSA on our website, don'tfeedwilddolphins.org. We have billboards. And we also, even in our hotspot areas like Panama City, Florida, we'll even fly banners across the beach to remind people not to feed wild dolphins. Next slide, please. But how can you help? And this is the most important. And I'm so glad to see so many kids on the call today, because you guys are really going to make the change, and you can help educate your parents too. So the most important thing you can do if you ever see a dolphin in the wild is please don't feed that animal. Just leave it alone and enjoy it. as you saw today from our presentation, I hope you learned that dolphins have some really cool behaviors, especially when it comes to feeding and socializing. And if you just stay back about 50 yards, you're going to get to see those behaviors. And you're going to get to see those animals acting pretty cool. And it's a lot better than trying to get your boat very close to them, because the animals are just going to avoid you, and they're not going to engage, and they're not going to do the things that you really want to see. And if you have any fishers out there, if you're fishing and dolphins approach you, or they're trying to take your bait or your catch, which is a problem here in Florida, the best thing I can tell you to do is to reel in your fishing line and move locations. And I know nobody likes to hear that, because it's frustrating. You have your favorite spot, but unfortunately, if the dolphin is at all reinforced, that they go back, that you threw back an undersized fish, or if they take something off your line, they just get reinforced, and they're just essentially going to keep coming back for more. Also, if you're ever walking the beach and you see a stranded dolphin or a stranded whale, which happens quite often on the Atlantic coast where you guys are located, the best thing you guys can do is call 1-877-WHALE-HELP. Please don't ever push a stranded animal back into the water. Those dolphins or whales have come up on shore because they are sick or injured, and they need our help. And so the best thing to do is to give us a call, and there's some great people out there that are trained to help these animals on the beach, and they'll assess them and figure out what's the best next steps. And I think that's all I have. I think I have just one more fun picture slide here from Florida Bay, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Beautiful, thank you. I think we have a couple questions in the chat. If you open that up and scroll up, you can see them. Otherwise, I'm happy to read them out.
Sure, let me pull it up. Let's see. So I see one question about, in recording bottlenose dolphin whistles, have you noticed that one sex is more expressive than the other? That's a great question. My expertise is not in acoustics, but my understanding is that they're pretty unique across the board, and there's not one sex that's more expressive than the other. There is a lot of research out there on how male calves differ from their mom's whistles, and I think they differ more significantly than the female calves' whistles, and that's essentially to make sure there's no inbreeding. So there's some cool research on that, but I think that's all I got there. Let's see. Let's see. What are the theories around the development of the muddy net capturing method? Is it argued that they learned a netting method while watching humans? That's a great question. It definitely probably wasn't from humans. If you've ever been to Florida Bay, it's extremely remote, and it's pretty horrifying to try to navigate a boat back there. So typically when we're out in Florida Bay, which is the reason I love it so much, is we are typically the only boat there all day. You don't see another human, which is pretty cool. But these animals are just creative, and my guess is it just evolved over time, that they eventually figured out that they could use the different changes in water pressure to herd the fish. I don't think, I'm pretty confident to say it didn't come from watching humans. I think it's just they kind of figured it out over time. Can dolphins crossbreed like dogs? That's a really good question. Somebody was asking if there are some, occasionally we do see some animals that appear to be a crossbreed of two different species. Sometimes I think we'll see spotted and bottlenose dolphins will crossbreed. There's also some out in Hawaii, they see it a lot more often, and between some of they have a lot more species out there close to shore, and they see, like, between false killer whales and pygmy killer whales, they might see some crossbreeding there. So yeah, it could happen. Let's see. So we have another question. Even though dolphins only sleep with half their brain, do they have areas that they sleep in at night, like a home base with their neighborhoods? So that's a great question. So dolphins kind of sleep throughout the day in little cat naps. They don't like go to sleep at night. They kind of cat nap throughout the day and throughout the night. They don't necessarily have resting areas, although some species do. Spinner dolphins in particular out in Hawaii will come into specific resting bays to rest for long periods of time. But bottlenose dolphins don't kind of have that predictable behavior pattern. They essentially will try to find a quiet place away from boats to try to rest. But it changes, you know, throughout the day. It could be because as I said, they kind of do it throughout the day. So it's not necessarily in the same place for those guys. So here's the question: why do dolphins have different fin colors? You guys might have noticed some of the different variations in the skin colors on the dolphins. And, you know, just like people, they have different shades. And so some tend to have more of like a very light gray, sometimes to be much darker, sometimes to be almost like a tan color. It just kind of varies. It's probably genetics. Some of them just look a little different from one another. What is my favorite type of dolphin? Great question. So my favorite type of dolphin is actually a spinner dolphin. Not only are they they do these really cool spins where they can rotate, you know, sometimes over 10 times over their axis while they're in the air. But I just find their behavior patterns really interesting out in Hawaii. Is they do these big height and then they come back into these shallow bays to rest, and so I really like those. I think those animals are pretty cool. Let's see. And I also like killer whales, I'll say, because I think they're awesome hunters. And as you guys probably saw from my focus on foraging, I love feeding behavior. So I like killer whales too, because they have some pretty interesting hunting behaviors. Let's see. Is there someone we should report to if we see people interacting with marine mammals in a bad, dangerous way? Yes, great question, Taylor. Thanks for prompting me. I think I missed that point on my last slide, but NOAA does have an Office of Law Enforcement hotline where you can call and report if you see someone illegally feeding a dolphin or harassing a dolphin. And we really ask people to do that. It helps us you guys are our eyes on the water. You know, we can't be everywhere, and we're based here on the west coast of Florida, and so we really rely on the public and our researcher friends to help report those kinds of incidents so we can ramp up our education in those areas. Let's see, what do dolphins eat? That's a great question. Dolphins eat squid and fish. They really like squid, believe it or not. It's one of their favorites, but they eat mostly fish. Dolphins can eat about 20 pounds of fish a day. And if a mom is nursing her calf, like if she's nursing a little baby, then she usually eats about 40 pounds of fish a day. So they eat a lot of fish. They're hungry. And they also get all their water from fish. So they don't drink like you and I do, but they just eat lots of fish. That's where they get all their nutrition, including their water. All right. I don't see any more questions. I think I might have got them all.